So if you guys hadn't tell, Ashley's excited for this next one.
I'm really excited. Like, so I love anything hand sculpting, anything like, you know, where you put in meticulous detail into things, and Kris is like the guy, you know? So,
yeah, this is going to be another good one. And again, I'm excited for this. And I think for everybody, you know, it's a Sunday, everyone taking time out of their day to share with us and our community is just amazing. You're all great. I'm really excited for this. This is going to be a lot of fun. This is a buckle up, definitely double buckle, because you're going to learn a lot of cool stuff from Kris in this presentation for sure. So without further ado, let's bring him in, everybody. Let's bring in Mr. Kris Costa.
Hey guys.
Hey Kris.
How are you?
How's it going? Good. It's a rainy day outside. It's actually pouring water in here.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I think we're getting that tomorrow down here.
No, it's pretty bad here in Surfell.
Yeah. I like the mood lighting too. You got a little of the purple going.
Did you see that? Yeah. That's the total YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm such a YouTuber these days, man. So that's the style.
You have to do it now, right? You
Yeah.
got to have some kind of thing going on in your background element, right? I've got the mystery pillow going.
Oh, there you go.
You haven't revealed any.
No, mystery. What? Only that part today. Only that part. I'll reveal a little bit.
I want some. Yeah.
A little bit, maybe. There you go. A little bit more. I'm going to reveal some of it as we go along throughout the days here, just for fun and giggles. So, Kris, thanks for joining us. We're really excited to have you here.
I hope I don't let you down.
No, I'm like, oh, let's go.
So we're going to put your screen up and let you start taking control over this. And then as questions come through, we'll try and throw them at you where we can. So anybody feel free to throw up some questions, and we'll find right times to ask Kris as
this
well.
Is my shameless plug right there. So like my humble school. So if you guys want to check out, learn from me, that's a good place to start. So let's start with my presentation itself. The idea today, because if you remember, you know, it's like a couple of years ago at the summit 2018, I approached the whole thing like going to like fine detail and doing all that kind of stuff, but not so much in terms of the structure and how to observe the form. And I think these fundamentals are very important. So I'm definitely going to be doing some demonstrations about like the detail and all that stuff. But I'm going to focus a lot on the, you know, how to observe the form and how to understand the subtlety and things like that. I think it's going to be an interesting one if you haven't seen it yet. So realism idealized, what does that mean? Like, is that some kind of like a pretentious term? Probably is. No, not really. It's about like interpreting reality, you know. When you have, for example, like when someone invented like the photography, right? Like, so all of a sudden you didn't rely on illustrations or paintings or anything. You have to rely, you could rely actually on photographing something and capturing reality as it was without having to interpret it. And then a lot of people start questioning, you know, it's like, oh, maybe painting is not going to be necessary anymore. Now we have photography, right? Obviously that wasn't the case. There is always space for the artistic interpretation, right? And so my whole goal, like doing my experiments and doing my personal work and even professional work, it's about experimenting and learning with what I see. You know, it's like, so reality to me is very intriguing. Sometimes it can be very twisted, but I like to focus on the, you know, it's like, for example, if I'm doing a portrait, I try to interpret what I see. For example, like if I look at the skin, I want to understand what makes the skin. And I want to understand the structures of the skin, so I can actually use that understanding to recreate and you know, it's like I can basically like come up with a character completely random, and having the understanding of how the direction of the wrinkles and pores and all this stuff, like how things relate to each other, I can recreate something out of nothing basically and make it look realistic. So that's the whole intention. I'm going to start like talking about the form hierarchy. And I think the main thing that we are so constrained to, it starts with the primary, secondary, and tertiary forms. You know, it's like we always use those terms, and especially if you come from a traditional background, there's no way to escape from that, right? Because all those forms are interdependent, and they depend. Like the next step depends on the previous step. So if you're sculpting with clay, you need to nail your primary forms first, because you're going to need to establish your planes, you're going to need to establish the distance between the elements, so like proportions and everything, before you can move on to the next step, which is the secondary forms. And then you're going to go, you can see my cursor, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, like if I look at this image in here, my primary forms would be like basically like the shape of the head itself, the distance between the elements and everything. But if I could simplify this, you would see just a bunch of planes and not a lot of form in there. The secondary forms would be everything else that you see in here. For example, this specific piece here, I don't have any tertiary forms, which would be like the pores and wrinkles and the superfine stuff. So everything here is basically secondary forms, right? But over time, like treating things as primary, secondary, and tertiary forms, those terms became a little bit obsolete to me because I'm talking about digital art here. So when you talk about digital art, you're not dependent on the previous step. So let's say if I'm sketching something like this, I'm not sketching just the primary forms before I move, before I move to the secondary forms. I'm gonna try to represent the expression as a whole. So I'm going to sculpt my primary and secondary at the same time, almost like if I was sketching on the paper, but in 3D. That's the ideal for me. And so in that case, I started to treat things as like a form, any form in the face, for example, as a fractal progression. So if I show you, for example, like let me just share some screens here just to illustrate what I mean by that. So in nature, you're going to find things like this, for example. This is obviously a tree, like tree branches. But then you're going to find in the human body, for example, this, which is like lungs, right? Like you have your lungs compared to this, it's pretty much like a fractal. So the forms, they just like evolve into smaller versions of themselves. So it's just like a repetition. You're going to find this in nature in many different things. For example, you're going to get very like mathematical expressions basically that create like the matrix of everything that exists, right? So you're going to find in plants and in ice, for example, like a snowflake, right? Everything is very mathematical. You're going to find, for example, veins. When I was like researching how I could create like micro veins for the eyeball, for example, or like micro veins for the nose and things like that, I started to look at lightning, for example, and I actually made some alphas out of lightning to recreate those little veins, and they work great. Actually, they work perfectly. So there's this fascination that I have about like this repetition, like things that happen to the human body reflected in nature, in plants, in the sky, for example, like galaxies and things like that. The shape of a galaxy, almost like mirror to the shape of a neuron in your brain. Very interesting stuff. So I started to look at form as a fractal progression, and a good example of that is when you look at something like this. If you don't know, Daniel Beauchamp, this guy, he actually created this technique. He uses like a robot to actually photograph and create something he calls face cartography. So those are images like 900 megapixels images. And I have some examples in here. If you go to gigapan.com, you can just type his name in there, Daniel Beauchamp, and you're going to find a lot of those images. And the cool thing about this is that you can get like really, really close to to everything, right? Like you can see all type of detail. So the cool thing about this, isn't it crazy?
Yeah, especially when you like go to the whiskers, they look like fishing line or something.
Yes,
like that. You go
exactly.
to his mustache, it looks like fishing line.
Yeah, and you can see the dust and everything. It's incredible. So. It's like, imagine this, like if I'm talking about like a traditional sculpture of a head, for example, and I'm talking about primary forms, I'm gonna definitely like, pick up like, if I blur my eyes, I can pick up the shape of the ears in here, so sizes, distances, planes, and things like that. And then you have the secondary forms, like I said, those shapes, like let's say like the major folds in here, it's like those are all secondary. And then as you get closer, you're gonna see like the tertiary forms, like the wrinkles and the pores and everything. But then this is all a matter of context, right? Because let's say if I'm sculpting an eye, for example, like this area of the eye here, and I just imagine, it's like what are the primary forms in here in this context, right? Then you're going to start seeing like, okay, so the shape of the eyeball itself, it's actually affecting the surface of the skin in here, bulging the eyelids, and I'm treating the eyelids now as being the primary forms. And within this context, I'm going to have like some smaller forms in here, like it's slightly smaller, which are going to be those folds in here, my secondary forms in relation to it. And then as you get closer and closer, everything becomes part of a context. So in that context, I cannot treat anymore as primary, secondary, and tertiary, because at any time anything can become primary, secondary, tertiary, because it's a matter of like how much you're approaching the subject, right? So that's why I decided to actually call things, it's like a fractal progression, it's like, in terms of sketching in motion, like I said, when I'm sketching something for my classes, for example, or in this case here was a portrait of Hitchcock, which was based on this single picture here I found on the internet. I thought it was pretty cool. It's kind of like he was looking to the side. In my case, he was looking more, it's like down. But just like trying to capture that emotion, it's like by sketching freely without having a ton of reference or anything, just like trying to capture that emotion, sometimes when you're too constrained by using those terms primary, secondary, and tertiary forms, you get constrained and you don't feel like it's like you don't have the freedom to actually express things in a way. So instead of like focusing too much about like nailing the proportions or anything, I just start doing my sketches, and then if the proportions don't quite work, with ZBrush or some other tools, it's like you have like a multi-resolution. So at any time you can go back to the lowest resolution, adjust your primaries, go a little higher, adjust your secondary, and you keep going with that, it's like, but without interfering with the expression itself. When it comes to collision in weight, what I call collision, it's basically all those forms. For example, like you have those shapes here of the nasolabial in here, you have your cheeks, you have your muzzle area. In all those forms, they're actually interacting with each other. They are not alone. So it creates a kind of like a ripple effect. It's like every time you have a facial expression, the facial expression is created by a bunch of levers that we have underneath, all the muscles, pulling things and when they pull things, they are pulling skin, they are pulling fat tissue, they are pulling like loose skin, all kinds of things, and all those forms, they are creating this ripple effect. For example, when you have a smile, in the smile here, so a little bit of the corner of the nose is going to be pulled up, the nasolabial is going to come up, this whole area of the lower lid is going to come up as well, creating a little bit of a squint. So everything is pulled and creates a ripple effect. So all those forms, they depend on each other. They push each other, and they are never alone. So the best way I can describe this, like when I'm sculpting, for example, is that I never use the standard brush for basically like anything. I only use standard brush, I believe, just like for veins. If I'm sculpting veins, it still works great. But for the most part, for anything like this, I always use the clay buildup. And the clay buildup is cool because it respects the boundaries between the different forms. So if I'm sculpting like the muzzle in relation to the cheekbone in here, the cheeks, then I'm gonna have that crease right in between there. And the clay buildup actually helps to create those creases very naturally. It's like, and then there's the weight as well, right? As you age, you're gonna get a lot of the gravity affecting the forms and everything. And, it's like in this case here, I even made a little bit of a joke in here. I made like this big fat piece in here, just like colliding against the table in there. And then you have something that I call the bone landmarks, and they are totally dependent on the age as well. So if I bring up some other image in here, let's see my bone landmarks. So you have those things here called the fat pads, right? So the fat pads happen in everybody's faces, right? When you're young, you have like this full, beautiful faces. Not everybody, right? I never had a full, beautiful face, but you know what I mean. And then, so like you have like those fat pads pretty tight against each other, right? Like so, everything is very full. But as you age, they shrink. And so they start shrinking, and then as they shrink, they start revealing more of the bone structures underneath. So you have your zygomatic bone in here starting to show up quite a bit. And not only that, but the muscles, they become a little bit weaker as well and thinner, and they lose volume. So for example, you can see the masseter in here losing volume and becoming a little bit tighter against the skull. So that's why, when you see someone older, you see the skull structure underneath like quite visibly, depending on, let's say like a 9-year-old or something like that. So those things actually end up like revealing a lot of the form structures in there. So this is very important to keep in mind if you're sculpting like certain ages, remember that, it's like if you're not sculpting someone who's completely emaciated, you're probably going to have a more naturalistic feel to the whole structure, instead of like wanting to represent all the muscles everywhere just to show that you know where they are. It's like the whole thing about people are so obsessed with like representing muscles, almost like the character has to be completely flexed at all times. I'm quite the opposite. I like to represent the forms very naturalistic. So keeping that in mind, the form subtlety and the flow. Form subtlety to me is one of the main aspects of what makes a portrait to look cool and appealing, and it's all in the secondary forms, if you consider secondary forms, right? In my case, it's just part of the processing here. But the form subtlety is something like this, for example. Even though this is a sketch, there's a lot of concern about how the forms interact with each other. So if you get this area here, for example, right, just a quick example, you're going to see like I have this form in here between the lower lip and this one here. So there's one form in here, another one in here. There's a tiny one in here. There's a fourth and fifth in here. There's a sixth one right there. So like all those things, they are very subtle, it's like between, it's like in terms of the relationship they have. Same with those transitions. I mean, like if I'm transitioning from the nasal labial here towards my zygomatic, those forms, it's like the way they interact with each other. I don't need to make them scream, it's like I don't need to make them really pop straight away. So that's why the best way for me to sculpt portraits, I use a clay buildup with a very low intensity, I would say like a 2 or 3, and create very, very thin layers. That way I can actually build the subtleties in between those forms. For example, like you see this form in relation to this one here. So, and then in relation to the zygomatic, there's 3 forms very distinct in here, but they don't scream. They're just like, it's a small, subtle transition between those forms, so it's very important. And the flow happens naturally because if you are able to actually present those transitions in a subtle way, one form is going to flow into the next one, and it's going to be very harmonic at the end. Another thing to keep in mind is like when you start to look at the super detail models, like a super fine like detail in terms of wrinkles and pores, the distance that you are representing the character in relation to the observer, right? Like, so if you're doing like a close-up shot, you're definitely gonna want to to show off like all the detail that you added and everything. But if it's like, let's say like a portrait that's like head to waist, for example, so like a full portrait like with the waist and up, you probably don't need to have like all this detail represented in there. But at the same time, because my approach is always trying to keep things as physically accurate as possible, the fine detail affects everything. Affects like the specular, affects the sebum, which is basically like the how you call like the sweat pass in the face. Everything is affected by the surface itself, right? So obviously you can simulate things with some roughness maps and other things like that, but in order to represent the face as I think it should be represented, it's like physically accurate, it's very important that you keep the tertiary forms and you make them very tight and nicely done, So physically accurate renders for form evaluation. What I mean by that is this. Let me just bring this one up as well. Some examples here. Let's say there's some lighting comparisons in here. So for example, if I see something in ZBrush, right? So I have this is like from my portrait of Velasquez. If I have something like this, I'm sculpting and I have a very good idea about where the forms are and everything. I can use like the quick ZBrush render as well, and ZBrush has some HDRI capabilities as well. You can use the key shot as well. But in my case, I mean, it's part of my workflow to use Maya with Arnold. So what I try to do from the get-go, as soon as I have like a sketch, way before I have something like this, I start throwing those models into Maya and start to do some renders straight away. And then over time, I start actually adding different types of lighting that I can experiment with. So this is like the same model Velasquez, but render in Arnold. So experimenting with the lighting itself to be able to evaluate the forms, because it's very easy to, it's like to get lost when you don't have like a physically accurate representation. certain volume is going to look correct from a certain angle under certain lighting, but then when you switch the lighting, it looks completely off. So having like different lighting setups, you can test things, is very important to be able to evaluate how the forms actually are physically, right? And then the last thing here is about refining your eye. It's back to that same example of, it's like the more you look, the more you learn, right? Like if you want to stop around right here, it's like in always treat a portrait as something that you don't go beyond this point. It's fine too, you can do that. But the more you look, the closer you look, the more you learn about the structures are made. It's like the directions, everything. So refining the eye is about that. It's like every time you look at a piece of, you're working on, you start seeing more and more things. And they evolve quite a lot. I mean, like from my first sketches for my portraits all the way to the final piece, they're very different. It's like it's this incremental understanding of how the form behaves. Injecting Life, this is another part of the presentation here. If you guys have any questions, do you have anything, Paul or Ashley?
Yeah, a couple questions came through.
Yeah.
I shared the website with them, and then some were asking, how long do you give yourself to do these pieces?
All those pieces, yeah. So I would say like my main goal before was to actually create one of those portraits and use it as a leverage for future portraits, right? So I could reuse the skin structures, all this stuff. But then obviously, like when I started my school, I was like, now I'm gonna have to do this to show my students, right? So instead of like leveraging like everything, I had to actually start everything from scratch every single time. So every single portrait you see is basically from scratch, which have a few things, let's say like specular maps and things like that. Sometimes I leverage from the previous models. But everything is from scratch. So I start doing the class, and I spend 4 weeks with my students, and I get to a point that the model looks good enough, but I probably not like completely finished, but at least like all the techniques are in place. I just have to, take my time to actually refine things from that point and finish it up. So I would say after I finish my class, this is 1 month. I would say 2 to 3 weeks after that. That's what I would take to finish it. So I would say a month and a half probably for each one of those pieces.
Wow.
That would be something like that. It's a lot of dedication.
Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah,
it's worth it.
This one here, for example, that's the stage that I had when I finished my latest class. This is like a portrait of Frank Frazetta, still in progress. I can show you some other shots. So I have actually the ones I have in Maya. It's a little bit further than this because at the end of the class I already had some of the hair and eyebrows and eyelashes and all this stuff. It looks like this. This is like when I stopped during my class, and then I have some of the hair as well. I can show you guys later. But yeah, about a month and a half for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
To a lot of people, that would be fast too.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I love the sketches. The 1 to 2 day sketches, they're fun. But yeah, this takes a lot of dedication.
Yeah, I don't even want to know where I begin trying to do I have something I've always wanted to do, and portraits scare me.
No, don't be scared. Yeah, you just have to go like Jack the Ripper. You go part by part.
Yeah. Well, that's I think for everything, right? You just gotta do it. You gotta do right. Do the do.
So yeah, back here. So like the Injecting Life. This is the part that's the most interesting for me when it comes to portraits, right? One thing is to be able to create something that's technically accurate, and then you can have like something looking completely realistic, but at the same time, at the risk of not looking alive, right? Like looking lifeless. So I have a special attention to making sure that my characters look alive, that they have intention, that they have thoughts. And there are a couple of ways to approach that. Like some of them are very technical. I'm going to be exploring that next. But at the end of the day, what I try to do with my portraits is simply like emulate reality, right? Like I'm not trying to create something that's absolutely real because I'm not using scans, I'm not using ready-made materials. With the tools that we have nowadays, it's like with Texturing XYZ, you have like the 3D scan store, it's like you have a lot of awesome resources you can use to create super realistic stuff. But in my case, I'm into this exploration about like how can I create something that's convincing enough. It's like a character that looks alive, that the skin looks alive, by imitating reality, but not like a one-to-one. It's basically like trying to understand how reality works, the structures of the skin, the structures of everything. It's like how this fractal evolution of the form happens as well, and try to recreate that in a way that if I want to apply those techniques to a monster, for example, to a creature, I can do that and create something that looks very realistic without having the need of having an actual creature in front of me. It's like to copy, simply like do a carbon copy of it. Studying the subject is very important. I can tell you, for example, let me just open another file here. Let me just make sure that I don't get confused. Just a second. Let me just get this.
Yeah, I love that you're mentioning all of this is applicable like outside of your portraiture as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. Some of my students actually, they started to apply this to creatures, and it looks very, very cool. I mean, like there's some amazing stuff out there. So, for example, this guy here, this is my Frazetta. So normally when I start my works, it's like I create a folder, and then I create my structure for my Maya files and everything. I have a ZBrush file folder in there, and I have my references, and then I try to collect as many references as I can of the character I'm going to be representing. And at different ages, it's like trying to keep everything in mind. In this case here, Frazetta, to me, he was one of the best cover artists. It's like back in the day in Brazil, I used to collect those magazines called Crypta, which in the United States, they are creepy. It's kind of like similar to heavy metal, a lot of horror stories and stuff like that, like comics. And Frazetta, I remember like the best covers was like all like oil painting. He did all of those covers, it's like they're incredible. So he was a big inspiration for sure. So I decided to actually make a portrait of him. He had it was like a stroke at some point, so he got like his eye got affected and everything. But I decided to go with an age that's a little bit after this, so it's kind of like probably his 50s. He actually used to use himself as a model for his heroes and everything. There's a picture in there with Clint Eastwood. So looking at all those portraits before I even start doing any sculpture is very important to understand the forms. It's like to see what parts actually strike you the most. It's like he has a very peculiar eye area, his nose as well. And then it's almost like a caricature artist, it's like who before does like the final version of it, does lots of tests, so you can see what parts you can actually exaggerate and everything. But in this case, instead of exaggerating, I'm just observing, trying to capture the facial expression, the intention, it's like what kind of expression I'm going to give him, if it's going to be a smiling one or not. Some of my characters I represent like with the smiles and everything. In his case, I think I'm going to keep his mouth closed. But trying to understand first like the mood, So the mood and intention, obviously. In the case of Velasquez, I want to create this version of him that he had this gaze, it's like that was kind of like a little bit like a almost like a sleepy here, but at the same time having this. It's almost like you can rest on him, it's like when you're looking at the portrait. So it's kind of like a calming type of expression. It's at the same time looking at him in a state of wonder, So for example, he has this slightly looking to the side, and so the eye gaze is important to me to represent this type of intention. It's like, for example, if I open some of my pieces in here, in her case, for example, I like this type of gaze, like looking slightly up and to the side, because it makes you connect in a way. It's like it's almost like you're looking at someone who has thoughts. And this has to do with the technical part as well. The technical part is about how you create your eyes, like your CG eyes. And normally when people place the CGI in there within the skull at the 90 degrees, so like facing straight forward, it looks completely crossed eye, right? Like, so the model, it's crossed eye. I'm going to explain that after. But normally what you have is about like 3, 5, 7 degrees of rotation outwards. And that happens because there is a kappa, that's a term that's used, that is actually the axis between like the iris and it's like it's a little hard to explain, but the fact is, like, if you're looking, for example, if you extend your arm and look at your finger, for example, your eyes are probably going to go more straight, I would say 90 degrees. As you get closer to your nose, let's say really close to your nose, just a few inches, then you're going to get crossed eye. But if you're looking to a distant place, for example, like a mountain through your window, your eye is going to start to diverge a little bit, right? You're going to rotate back to this about like 5 degrees outwards, and then you're going to get the more naturalistic feel, So when you're trying to represent some character that you want the character to be believable, someone who has thoughts, is looking far away and having thoughts about something, then you normally add this rotation, it's like, and you kind of like fake that. So very important. Lighting as a storyteller, it's very important as well. Always, depending of the type of story you're going to tell, obviously. This is all from the internet, obviously. But in cinematography, it's like you're going to have like some color codes, it's like you're going to have a color language, right? Like certain symbols that you use in a movie, for example, depending of the type of character, that character is associated with the green light, for example, or to bluish light or something like that. So the elements in the scene always follow that structure, And also the lighting here as a storyteller, for example, like in this case here, the same portrait under different lighting, for example, you're going to see this, the very intense looking here. You're going to see this type of lighting from below in covers of magazines, like for horror movies, for example, or posters. It's like it's this very intense look, and then you have something that's much more subtle, which is like a more portrait lighting, like a more traditional portrait lighting, and then this is more like a flashlight, so it kind of like washes out all the detail and then flattens the whole face, right? So
So someone asked for your maps, your diffuse normal displacements. You're using ZBrush to do all of those.
All of those, I'm going to go over them.
Yeah.
Let's see how I'm going to do. Halfway already. It goes fast, man.
Yeah, halfway.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it goes super fast. So those are other studies also trying to capture, like, what type of lighting would represent the character with the mood that I wanted, Same for those guys in here. I mean, like, I was doing all those tests with different HDRIs to see what type of mood I would go for that character. Same with this ones here. So for lighting, you can go to HDRI Haven, which they changed the name now, but if you type HDRI Haven, you still can find a website. I download all my HDRIs from there, So let's keep going here. So the details that draw your eye. I'm going to go back to another one that I just showed you guys, which is a good example, I think. This one here, for example. So when you're sculpting a female or young children, for example, the forms are very subtle, right? Like, you don't have a lot to rely on. It's not like sculpting an old man. You can hide a lot of the problems with wrinkles and everything. So, but you still can see certain things gonna draw your eye in here. And I would say, like, the first thing that draws your eye are the eyes themselves, because you have this connection since you're a baby, it's like you connect to your mother or whoever is taking care of you, is this direct connection. So the first thing you're gonna look normally in the character is the eyes, and then everything that surrounds the eyes. So if you have like structures that need to look like soft, for example, it's like those wrinkles here is basically going to help a lot to represent this type of soft skin around it, some flexible skin. If I created those wrinkles, for example, just as a single wrinkle in here, it would not look as interesting. If I didn't pay attention to the hierarchy of those forms in here, it would not sell the idea that it looks alive. But when you start introducing like those secondary folds, it's like it's almost like, okay, I can feel that that's a form that is actually soft. I can actually understand that. Same for those wrinkles in here. So you see, like, if you look overall, you don't see a lot of forms in here. Everything is very subtle. But those details around here, the eye around here, obviously the nasolabial little wrinkles in here, the lips, those things capture your attention. So there are certain landmarks in the face that always capture your attention and make you understand as being alive. It's like, so those are some of them. Then obviously you have the asymmetry. If you get like a Giger in here as an example, it's another portrait I made. There is this asymmetry in here. It's based on a couple of photographs I found of him online. So you see there's a little bit of a smirk on the side in here. Like I said before, everything is motivated, so the side of the nose in here is going to be pulled up slightly. You know, it's like slightly. It started to become like a squint in here as you go over higher and higher with the cheeks. You know, this asymmetry is the only way you're going to be able to actually capture likeness for the most part, because most faces are completely asymmetrical. Not completely, but mostly asymmetrical. And then the pose itself, like if you're talking about the portrait, my poses are always very, very subtle. It's always like a little bit slightly tilt to the head, for example, to a side like this. You know, it's like in portrait, I mean, like you're going to be talking about someone coming to a studio, and I have my old Rick Baker in here as well, like if you remember. You bring in someone to the studio, you want to make sure that this person is actually sitting comfortably there. You know, it's like he has a connection with the camera, and the pose is very subtle. You know, it's like if you don't want to get the person to do a lot of gymnastics in there, like for a pose. So normally very subtle stuff.
No flips.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the website, just I put the website in chat. It's now called Polyhaven.
Oh, Polyhaven, yes, that's right.
That's it.
Now
right?
they have models as well and
Yeah.
everything. They are really great, man. They do serious work. Oh, I'm not related to any of those people actually that I'm talking about here, like any of them, like in terms of being associated with them. But I really like what they make. That's why I plug their work like without getting anything in exchange. But with HDRI Haven in the past, I remember like I paid, I think it was like $5 or something in their Patreon, and they gave me access to the entire Google Drive. So you can go to the Google Drive, you can download all the HDRIs straight away. I don't know if they still have that, they probably do. So check that first, and then if they do, it's totally worth it, you know.
Wow, that's a great deal.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to the detail here, accessories and everything, obviously if you're telling a story, you're going to have to put in the context of, you know, it's like it's a piece that's kind of like someone who lived in the past, right? You're going to have to research the type of outfit and, you know, it's like the costume that they used like back in the days and everything. And then everything is going to be part of the story being told in here. The story can be told by a bunch of characters, or it can be just like a simple portrait, as long as you have like the right facial expression, you know, it's like the mood, the lighting is correct, like the costume is correct, you know. You can tell stories by just having a simple portrait. Here are a couple of measurements I brought up as well. That those are very important, and they are just like averages, obviously, but they can be very helpful for you guys. When you're working with actual renders, let's say like physically accurate renders, like Arnold in Maya, you want to make sure that everything is like world scale, right? Like otherwise the subsurface scattering, the scale of the subsurface scattering is not going to work, things like that. So I keep everything physically accurate as much as possible. So for the head average height, you're going to use about 9 inches. Something between 8.6 to 9.4 would be like the size, the height of the face. And then the eyeball is going to be about 24 millimeters. It can be a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger. In the case of my Frazetta, I actually made slightly bigger, so I think it's close to 25. It's 24 point something. The iris average radius is about half of that, so you can have that as a reference. This is important because otherwise you start making the eyes too tiny or too big. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes you want to make the eyes bigger to look cuter, so it's like closer to like a baby or a small child proportion, so we want to make that. And if you want to make more creature looking like, you know, then you're going to make the eyes smaller, but in general those are the proportions for a average human. The pupillary average distance, this is basically when you go to have like your eyes exempt, they're going to actually measure the distance between the pupils. So if you get in this ballpark here around 63 millimeters, you're in a good spot. The eye rotation, like I said, about 5 degrees outwards, you're going to rotate them. Between 3 and 10 average, so sometimes if you want to make a slightly more wall-eyed, you can increase that. I think my Frazetta is about like maybe 6, something like that, because I noticed that his eyes are a little bit further. And then when it comes like to the grooming part, then you have some averages here that are important as well. So the eyebrows are going to get between 250 and 1100 per eyebrow. 250 for plucked eyebrow, obviously. If it's unplucked, then a higher number. Eyelashes, the upper eyelashes between 90 and 150. So let's say 150 compared to the lower 175 in average in there. So like double at the top than the bottom. They're normally at the bottom they are thinner as well, and you know, a little bit more spaced out. For the scalp itself, around 100,000 follicles, and for the beard, which is not her case, 30,000. And most of the concentration is around the chin and the muzzle area. So you're gonna get between 5 and 25,000 around this area specifically. And then let's go dive into the skin itself. Let's talk about like patterns by region, tone by region, depth, direction, all this stuff. So I can open a couple of websites here for you to take a look. So the first one is going to be the direction. Let's get Carla in here. And for example, like you're going to find like different patterns around the face. You're going to find out, for example, around the chin in here, you're going to have this direction. You're going to see those micro wrinkles in here that you're going to start actually creating a little bit of you know, it's like a circle in here. So they start going down in this direction, down in here. They start going in a circle right here, and they're gonna start going almost like a around. How can I say that? So if you have like the muscle area here around the lips being a circle, they're gonna try to follow the perpendicular way. You know, it's like, so basically like those lines are gonna happen vertically in here, slightly diagonal here, more horizontal in here, and then they're gonna keep going that way. So those are like micro wrinkles I'm talking about here. They're going over the pores themselves in here. Then you're going to get certain areas, for example, the frame of the lips. You're going to have those micro little wrinkles at the very edge of the lips in here. And they're going to start getting bigger and bigger and then becoming the lips themselves. Then they start actually blending back to the pores themselves in here. So getting closer to that. The nose itself, the pores are very shallow. You're gonna get those, you know, those black heads and everything, and a lot of the peach fuzz as well. You're gonna be seeing here in the ears as well. So it's amazing stuff. In terms of the type of skin, the chin, the cheeks area and the muzzle area in the chin, they're gonna be somehow similar. And also they look a little bit more like spread out. So the pores look a little bit more spread out in those areas because they're more bulged, right? Like you're gonna have like the bulge of the teeth pressing against the muzzle area here. You have the chin itself, you have the cheeks, so they're broad areas. So they look like they're more spread out. But in terms of structure, they're fairly the same across the whole face. They just change certain directions, you know. When you get to the forehead, you're gonna get a little bit more of a horizontal line like that. They're gonna, you know, it's like the pores start to actually become more horizontal in that way. There's this very interesting little area here. In her case, not very visible, but you have a lot of micro wrinkles, very horizontal, right around here. And imagine that every single wrinkle, when you look at the face like this, they are basically a memory of the facial expression. So you have the facial expression, you know, it's like over time, you do the facial expression for years and years of your life. When you're older, you're going to have those, you know, wrinkles pretty much like very well marked in there. It's almost like an echo of the past, you know, it's like all the movement that your face did across the years, as you can tell by looking at Roger here, right? Roger has.
So when you were sharing the one with the measurements, someone was asking, are those measurements per, for example, they were asking per the eyebrow, or you're doing the same density per side? Density.
Well, I start doing that, yes, but because I had a lot of variation in my grooming, you know, it's like I can actually make things a little bit thinner in one side than the other side. But overall, yes, I start that way. In the case, I mean, like certain people are gonna have like scars. My son has a little scar in his eyebrow, for example. I'm gonna have to deal with that as well. But overall, yes, it's the same for both.
Okay. And then you're using for your hair and your eyebrows. You're using, what are you using to do that?
Oh. Let me. I can jump right into it here. Let's see. So my Maya here, I can show you what I have for my eyebrows and everything. So this is the model in Maya, and I'm using XGen for everything. So I can show you like the eyebrows that look like this right now. Let's say if I break everything down here. So for example, I have my eyebrows in here. I have a bunch of different patterns that I use in here, different modifiers. So I start with a clump. first I have my guides in here. So like I start with the eyebrows pretty much like straight like that. So I have my guides in next gen that I just show like this. So they follow a certain direction. They normally create this V shape. So like you have those little V shapes in here. So when I turn them on, I actually force the eyebrows to follow that direction. But then later I start to incorporate like, okay, let me add some clump, get some clumping going on. And then some noise as well. The noise I tend to actually exaggerate a lot in next gen because if I try to do something more subtle, normally in the render it doesn't look right. So I try to do that. But in terms of the hair, I can show you what I have for my actual hair. And here it's not done yet. But for example, this is the main upper part of the hair. So I'm actually separating the upper part from the sides. So that's not finished yet. Obviously, I'm just like grooming things. So I have everything separated. So I have the hair itself right there. And then I have this blend here, which is just like this slightly thicker hair. Let's see, where's this one? So it's slightly thicker hair. This one is going to blend to the peach fuzz itself. So the peach fuzz, it's the vellus hair in here. So I have this one. So the peach fuzz starts like very thin and small, and then it starts getting a little bit thicker and a little bit longer when it gets closer in here. All of that to create some kind of like transition between those forms. If I open, for example, like let's say Giger here, see like there's some thinner ones in here. Even I think Rick Baker had some better transition somehow. Yeah, there's some thin ones. Yeah, it's hard to see in here. But yeah, let's see if my old lady. Yeah, I think she has plenty of those. So it has like this thinner hair in there. And everything starts with the peach fuzz itself and then becomes more of this blend transition. And then it becomes the hair itself,
And you cover this in your course, someone's asking.
Oh, yeah, everything is covered in the course, yeah. But yeah, so for the eyelashes, that's what I was talking about before. So about like double the density at the top than what I have in the lower part. What I try to do with the eyelashes as well is to, before I start the grooming, I select like, let's say like 2 or 3 rows of faces, because sometimes people select just one and it looks like dull, it's like everything is just like linear. And if you have like, if you look at the references of eyes, you're going to find out that they actually spread quite a bit. They have like some ups and downs in there. And then, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Like there's, some nose hair, it's like all this stuff.
Gotta have that ear hair.
Yeah. So ear hair and all that stuff.
Right.
And then
Can't forget any of that stuff.
yeah. So when it comes like to the skin tone, then let's talk about this last part here, which is the skin tone itself. Those are all like from the internet references I found, but it's pretty much like they all kind of agree in a way. A little bit more yellow towards forehead, a little bit more red towards the center, especially with males, right? Because of the, we're gonna have like blue, green, and gray around this area. Same example you can see around here. This is a little bit more, separated, so a little bit more complex in there. Same with this one, simplified version, a little bit more complex in here. So when I start to paint my colors, my albedo, everything is done in HD geometry, and I try to do something like this, it's like to incorporate those colors. But
so
then
you're poly painting in ZBrush when you're
everything is poly painted. So before,
wow.
Let me just go back in here to the model to show you guys what I have. So this is the model here, just with the sketch hair. And then let's look at the albedo that I have in here. Let's switch to HD first. I'm gonna go here. So the entire face, if you plan your model correctly, you can get the entire face in HD. As long as you have around like between 40, 45 million polygons, you should be able to actually accommodate everything into HD. So the entire face here works in HD. So I'm gonna press A, I'm gonna go to HD here. And now if I press solo, I can just see exactly what I can sculpt in HD. And this one here obviously shows the whole thing, but I can only sculpt within this area. So if I switch to show you my albedo, it looks like this, like the flat color. So this is all hand painted. And taking into account, like I start with that same structure, right? Like a little bit more blue around here, a little bit more red in the center, a little bit more yellow at the top. But then everything is painted, keeping in mind the structures and microstructures of the face. That means that I'm never going to go with a plain color and just paint a huge amount of, a huge portion of the face with a single color. Like I said before, if you look at something like this, Let's look at Peter here, for example. You see his nose, for example. When you look at someone like this, the tendency is to just think like, oh, he has a red nose. And you don't even think about it. You just like go and paint the nose slightly more red. But then when you start looking at what makes his nose look red, you're going to see those micro veins, for example. Some are deeper and more diffuse. Some are a little bit more shallow, a little bit more in the surface and much more defined. And then in between the pores in here and everything, you're going to see echoes of the same structures, it's like the tiny micro veins in here represented. This is what's causing this redness to happen in here. At the blackheads, for example, they have the name blackhead, but if you paint them black, it's going to look completely awkward in your model. So the tendency is to actually try to paint them slightly darker than the skin itself, sometimes a little bit more towards orange brown, they should be called brown heads.
Yep. I'll give you a time check too, Kris. 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So you know.
Yeah, there you go. And so when I paint my structures in here, I try to incorporate a lot of this. It's like obviously here I still have to refine some more, but I mean, like I have my little lightning in here.
So painted. What brush do you use? You built a brush for painting?
Yes, for those micro veins.
So they can see it.
Yeah. So for the micro veins, let's do let's see if I have my veins in here. So you see like this alpha here looks like lightning.
Yeah.
So I just switched to a color. All the colors when I use them, I try not to use like super saturated colors. You see like I went with a super red in here. I try to keep the colors a little bit more desaturated in a way. So like bring it more towards gray. And then I can add something like this. Obviously with not the same intensity, I can use like lower intensity, for example. And then I can create something that, for example, if I want to make sure that those details look a little bit deeper, I can actually use the alpha in here and just blur it completely. So I go to my blur here, just like blur it a lot. And then when I do something like this, I can create an impression that's deeper, When it comes to the detail itself in the surface, let me just switch to my material here. It's a lot of the same that I show you guys the previous presentation. If you didn't see, check that out, like for the summit in 2018. But then a lot of the things I'm doing these days, instead of using the standard brush as a base, I'm actually using the elastic brush. And the difference is this: for example, if you use the elastic brush, you're gonna just duplicate it. Gonna do like a clone in here, and then I can use like it's like a spray. And if I switch and I use the same brush I use for a lot of my detail, this alpha 16 here. The difference between using the elastic and using the standard is that the standard, if you go over the same area over and over again, it starts obliterating the whole form. But then with the elastic, it preserves a lot of the detail that's underneath. So let me just switch to something like very, very subtle in here. So let's do let's say like 30. And then if I do something like this, let me use my tablet. Let's see, 20. If I go over here, I can start to actually, even after I have all my detail in place, all my pores in place and everything, that area that I mentioned, like all the directionality that I need around here, I can actually use a brush like this and just like, I don't know if you're going to be able to see, but around here, I'm actually introducing some direction.
Wow.
Yeah, you can see it.
Yeah, and it actually goes and it doesn't destroy the pores themselves, It's like, so you start actually incorporating that. You can actually use this in circles as well. Like if I go in circular motion like that, I can actually incorporate some of this detail in circular motion. But yeah, it's a shame. Like, I mean, like it goes so fast, 1 hour, man. It's crazy. I had a lot of stuff to show, but but for the most part, I mean, like in terms of the detail, you're gonna get a lot from the previous presentation for sure. But let me see what I had to go over here just to make sure that I hit all the main stuff first. Let's see. Let's get this one here. I was around here. Actually, this one. Let me go back. So
somebody was asked. Oh, sorry. Just somebody was asking how often you switch between programs for testing things out.
Oh, between ZBrush and Maya, all the time. I mean, like I do a sketch first, bring it straight away to Maya, do some renders just to check like proportions and it's like how the forms behave, and then I assemble a scene from the get-go. Like during my classes, we assemble a scene, I think in the first or the second class lesson, and then from that point we just iterate on that. It's like, so it's very early on, but yeah. One thing I have to cover, I forgot here, it's someone asked about like the other passes. Yeah, everything is painted in ZBrush. Very simple stuff. This is my specular level, for example. Very simple. You have to keep in mind that it's completely dependent on how the surface is being broken down by detail, right? So the specular can look very simple like this, but the way that the surface is sculpted is going to define a lot of this. And then I have this roughness pass in here. And this roughness pass, what I use it for, it's basically to control how high it's my micro displacement. I use another pass in Maya that's a micro displacement. And I control how high it is. So for example, like, around the eyelids in here, if I want something to look shinier and a little bit more wet, I'm going to keep it completely black in here. For the nose as well, a little bit shinier. And then the opposite is true as well. Like for the ears, not a lot of shininess in there or anything like that. I can actually just go back in here in my Maya and I can show you what I have. Last thing I forgot to mention. Okay, last thing here, and then I can just point you to a link. So one thing that I notice is that a lot of times when you're looking at the this point here, albedo from scan data and overly saturated SSS effect. A lot of times when you get the albedo extracted from, let's say, like a light stage capture session, the subsurface scattering comes basically baked into the color itself. There's no way to remove the subsurface scattering. They remove like the specular levels because of it's like they do a polarized version of it, so they can remove that. But the subsurface scattering is always baked. So what I try to do with my color before I can render anything, I try to desaturate everything. Imagine like if you see like a dead body in the morgue, for example, like all the blood is not in the surface anymore, so you get this kind of like desaturated, pale bluish kind of tone. So basically that's what I do behind the curtain here, is like use a color correction node before I can actually plug my color into the subsurface, so I can actually desaturate things and turn things a little bit more bluish and everything, But I gotta point you guys, since we are not gonna have time to actually explore everything, I'm gonna point you to a couple of links in here. That's gonna be very useful for you. So the first one is gonna be this one here. You can go to my another plug. So I have a YouTube channel now. There is this video here. You can check this behind the work HDR Gigger. So if you go to this one, I actually break down like the shader network, how I'm plugging, actually detailed quite well how I plug like my specular levels. So I can use the micro displacement to actually break up the specular and everything. So check that video out. Another one for you to check is this guy here. He has an Instagram. His Instagram name is this, Joe's Lock Bower. And he has a collection of life casts, right? So life casts are very important to be able to understand like the skin structures and everything, but not as reliable for likeness as you might think, because there's a lot of pressure that happens, it's like on the face when you're casting, because of the heavy materials being deposited in there. But from a light stage, you can actually rely on the likeness much more. But still, this is a great resource, like for skin detail and things like that. And then the 3D scan store, they have a lot of awesome scans in there you can study from. I particularly don't have any, but I really like, to look at lists like in the images from the website. I gonna end up like buying some stuff for sure, just to get a better idea about this type of detail you get from the scans themselves. And then obviously the eyes, if you type something in Google like eye close up, you're gonna find a lot of awesome reference in there. It's like for sculpting the iris, very important stuff. And all of the stuff I spoke about here, obviously I go like into full-on detail for like close to 40 hours in my classes if you guys are interested. And if not, in my YouTube channel, I'm constantly posting different things that I go over things in a little bit more detail. So check it out.
Yeah, I know there's a website too. I think you can also purchase actors' life casts. I can't remember what it is though.
Yeah.
What it is. But it's like multiple generations. though. It's not obviously an original. They're casting, I think, from an original that's now been casted and casted and casted. But I know there's one that exists out there.
Hey, you mentioned the Hulk before, like Mark Ruffalo. The interesting thing is that when we did that, we got the the life cast, right? Like the scan of the life cast, and we got the light stage as well. So with both of them, I was able to actually project everything into 2 different models, and then I could pick and choose what detail worked the best. And it's very interesting because the likeness you can trust from the light stage, obviously because there's no contact. But then for the skin itself, we got a lot of awesome detail from the life cast. So like, especially neck and things like that was pretty cool.
I just love that you guys put his fingerprints on the hand.
Fingerprints is a great fact. I love that.
Well, he grabs the camera, right? Doesn't he grab the camera? That's why you did it, right? Doesn't he grab the camera and put his
There is a shot that actually there's this super slow motion punch. He punches one of those big creatures. I actually modeled those creatures too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and you can see a little bit of the fingerprints.
Well, it goes to how much detail you put in, and I think that also goes to show to your work that you're doing with portraits. Like, it looked like you had a personal photo in like someone's photo book for some of those pictures with Frank. Right? You were like at his house and go, "Oh, there's some good pictures. Let me take some pictures." You do some serious research on the internet, looking, diving into the character as much as possible.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's like when I started doing those portraits, I thought I would be kind of like, I'm gonna get tired very soon. But then every single character is a completely different challenge. It's like every time you look at this the skin structures and everything, it's like super different. For example, this little guy here, he had progeria. He died years ago. And he died when he was 17. So, but they look like old people, But at the same time, the skin itself is kind of like baby-like, It's like it's very thin. So every single portrait, I try to challenge myself and try to see things a little bit differently. It's like a little bit tanner skin, or it's like there's a lot that happens. I mean, like if you start looking deeply, for example, the Velus hair, which is the peach fuzz. It varies wildly depending on the type of ethnicity, for example. You're going to get more or less of it. Same for like facial hair, like, it's like over your upper lip, for example. I was looking at this, like there's a paper comparing like women and, it's like the little mustache in women. Because normally those things are related to products that they sell, like for, beauty stuff.
Yeah.
And one of those papers talking about like Indian, Indian women have more, and then it's like it goes like there's like Japanese, and then it's like they compare all those things.
This hair color, there's different numbers. Like red, I think has the thickest hair. And then every hair color's got different number of spans of hair.
It's amazing, man. It's the amount of variation you get, like doing portraits. It's endless. That's what keeps me driven. It's like to do more of it.
Right.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, this was awesome, Kris. Yeah, I encourage. He was talking about his 2018. I encourage you guys going to check that out too. Probably when we're done with the summit this year, we'll be breaking off, and we can add that in the link on our YouTube as well, so you guys can see that, because you go through all your brushes and your alphas. And
yes, a lot of that
as well.
Because I was afraid of being redundant, and those things I spoke about today, they're so important for the life of the character. That goes a little bit beyond the technique itself, So yeah.
Well, this is awesome. Again, his studio is. If you want to put your studio information back up again, too, so people are aware of that. Fly on the Wall.
Fly on the Wall studio. This guy.
There you go. So there's his URL. So you guys have that as well. I know some of you are like, all right, I got to take your class now. So that way people are aware of that. And then your YouTube. Right, he shared that as well on this.
Yeah, the intro
is recorded, people, so you can go back and watch it. So there's his YouTube. You can find.
Oh, I love your YouTube channel too. I've been lurking.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I had it for a while, but I never posted anything. And then a month ago, I started posting stuff, and I was like, oh, that's kind of fun.
Yeah, no, you talk about things in such a great way. It's excellent. I recommend everybody go and subscribe. Go.
Oh, thank you.
Right now.
Awesome. Well, Kris, thank you so much, and thank you for taking your Sunday, part of your Sunday with us as well. I know you got stuff going on at home and busy, so I appreciate you taking time to come and share all this information with us.
That was perfect, because I'm in between jobs, man, so I have all the time right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So
Well-
thanks again, guys. Like Paul, Ashley, and it's like everybody involved. Jaime, Kyle, everybody involved. It's like again, like I have such a long relationship with Pixologic. Back like I would say 20 years. I would say when I started.
Back when you were the banker in Brazil.
Yes, exactly. And so I really appreciate. I mean, like a lot of my career, as I posted in my latest video on YouTube. I mean, like is around ZBrush basically. It's like a lot of stuff related to my personal work and my growth as an artist and in this industry. It's like it was completely connected to how ZBrush developed as well. So I really appreciate everything.
Awesome. All right. Well, Kris, we'll let you get on with your rest of your Sunday, and Ashley and I are going to get gear up for the next presentation with id Software. So, Kris, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
For being
Thanks,
a part
Kris.
of it. Bye.